How did... Oh, a lot of people died to that, actually. I was about to say, no one died. This is a good time for a knockback immune. Because... Uh-oh. Well. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're just playing Scholar. And this time, we actually got a reasonable mix of duties instead of just all low-level dungeons. And we even had some challenges in extremes too. But, that said, we start with duty 1, Praetorium. Overall, the duty went about as well as a Praetorium can go, with the team being pretty solid, although randomly, weirdly, specifically on the Gaius fight, our ninja started single-target dottoning. Sometimes this can happen due to misinput, like if you go through the mudras a bit too fast, and then doing dotton is indeed better than bodying it up, but the fact it happened multiple times in a row surprised me a bit. For duty 2, we're going to the first trial of Endwalker, which is quite a spoiler if you haven't done it yet, so jump to this timestamp here if you want to skip it. That said, we of course went to Zodiac. Very early in the fight, I use Rescue to help a first-timer dodge our half-room cleave. After that, our party sticks together pretty nicely until the Great Cataclysm, faithfully recreated, where both our warrior and our dancer go down at once. Thankfully, our Dark Knight remembered to provoke, but now we have to handle the stack marker with 2 players dead, so I use almost every single cooldown available to me, and it seems the Astrologian did the same. And despite that, our summoner still went down through all that damage. A bit later, we have another stack where the dancer's dead, but we do manage to hold it together to the end. Even having a melee LB that somehow didn't result in any deaths, as several players seemingly took the huge line AoE to the face. For duty 3, we went to Titan Extreme as a 13-minute replacement, and the Black Mage knew me. Hello! On the pool I suddenly was dumped into, we wiped due to Titan being allowed to perform his knockback from the center of the arena. On the second pool, Titan is slightly further out from the center, but still close to it, making the strictness of positioning too tight and half the rate goes down, putting us in an unrecoverable position. On the third pool, once again, about half the raid, including both tanks, fly off the arena, partly due to players trying to aim the knockbacks to avoid the awkwardly placed AD AoEs, and we gradually wipe out again. On the fourth pool, a healer and a tank gets shoved by the knockback, and then the other tank gets shoved off by landslide, putting us in the same unrecoverable state as we had seen before. On the fifth pool, we finally make it through, still with a bunch of deaths, but only one of them was a tank or healer death, allowing us to recover, at least. To be clear, on every single wipe I explained the knockback problems, and each time Titan was tanked a little bit further out to the edge. And indeed, when Titan was finally all the way out, what we needed to review was mostly what to do to not die from the knockback. And that was just about when we finally succeeded. Well done, team! For duty 4, we went to Dohn Mheg. Early on in the dungeon, I focused on figuring out somewhat how the warrior was going to use their raw intuition. Typically, they use it at around 50% HP. The reason this matters, especially for a barrier healer, is that if you know that the warrior will use raw intuition, and better yet, when, then you can plan your cooldowns around that. But if you don't know, you may need to use your cooldowns from the beginning, since if the tank drops really low, it may be really hard to save them. On the other hand, if the tank dies from not using their own tools, it could be argued that that is on them. But then again, doing what you can do as the healer is also worth considering. The first boss has a mechanic that tends to catch a lot of players off guard, Landsblood. The way I usually handle it is as follows. Stand somewhere safe, obviously, but once you see a splash resolve, step into it, as any one spot in the arena cannot explode twice in a row. This changes the mechanic from having to look for safe spots to looking for explosions, which arguably is easier to do. On a poll just before the second boss, I also got a lesson in why you do need to keep an eye on the fight, even when it seems to be mostly over, as I managed to perfectly look away when 2 telegraphs appeared and look back exactly when they were no longer visible, leading to my death. Whoops. On the second boss, our tank messed up and didn't get a fodder tether, and while it wasn't a huge difference, I definitely felt that the boss had a bit more damage as a result. Aside from this, the duty went pretty well. For Duty 5, we went to Friendly Clubs. Only advice here is that no enemy survives long enough to justify using bio at all. For Duty 6, we went to Tam-Tara Deepcroft with a very sprouty tank. Throughout the duty, they do get a bit more confident with their pulls. I also briefly explained to them to use overpower rather than single targeting things. The duty went at a reasonable pace of course, but considering Scholar's toolkit at this level, not that much for me to do with pulls like this, especially since the tank was even using defensive cooldowns at times, which is a good thing. For Duty 7, we went to Rathalos Extreme, and Naomi and Agent Monica are here. Aside from a rather unlucky hit right at the start of the fight, Phase 1 goes pretty smoothly. Going into Phase 2, we were also extremely lucky with our tank being targeted by the multi-stack multiple times in a row. A tip for healing this Phase 2 as Scholar is that just before the phase begins, you can still set up a barrier on the party, whether with Succor or with Adlo deploy. Usually this barrier will only help in case someone gets hit by an avoidable attack early on, but it is better than doing nothing. Once the no healing effect kicks in, the main thing you can do is be sure to use Ishuna whenever someone has a debuff on them. You can also use Sacred Soil and Fey Illumination to reduce the damage of the stack markers to make them a little safer to handle, but beyond that, you can only really help by attacking. We managed to get Rathalos down a second time before something went sideways when Rathalos targeted Agent Monica for the stack marker, and right as the last hit landed, immediately targeted them again with another attack, leading to a death. Thankfully, we finished off the fight from there. For Duty 8, we went to Doma Castle. This run went pretty well, so let's talk a bit about boss mechanics. The stack marker on the second boss actually ignores mitigation, for some reason, which means that setting up things like Sacred Soil for it, while probably unnecessary, doesn't do anything. For the final boss, I also have 3 tips. The first one is that you can simply sidestep the tank buster chainsaw, as the boss keeps chainsawing in the same spot even if you move. On the other hand, his machine gun tracks you as you move, so the best you can do there is just stand still and let the party step aside. Finally, the second time he uses the baited proximity AoE thermobaric charge, he puts those knockbacking lines from the second boss right in the center. A way to completely eliminate this problem is to have someone simply stand in those lines. The easiest way is to have someone not targeted by the proximity AoE stand in them and just launch themselves over to a different corner, preferably where the boss is, while the targeted player runs off to a separate corner to place the AoE. Alternatively, if you yourself are the target, you can use the lines to launch yourself to the corner you want to place the AoE in, and then simply walk back. Pretty convenient. For Duty 9, we're back in the Marble Bubble Bath. I recently made the very weird and late discovery that it seems the marble's bad breath can damage the bubbles too, although there isn't much you can do with that information. For Duty 10, we are a 12-minute replacement in M8N, Howling Blade. My guess is that they wiped very slowly, and then a healer left, because this kind of fight can definitely drag on a lot without immediately wiping you. Oh, also a really random side note, I noticed the Black Mage did a cold opener, B3, B4. The reason it stands out a bit is simply because hot openers, F3 directly, tend to do better unless you have a really good justification that cold open gives you some sort of specific advantage. This mostly stood out to me in this case because of the other accolades attached to this individual, although, you know, they might not have played Black Mage as much anyway. Just before the ad phase, our dancer goes down during the Terrestrial Rage, and then after the ad phase, the rain takes out the Black Mage due to an unlucky position. Unfortunately, they get back up to immediately die again due to the Earth Pillars. We manage to get them back up again and mostly hold steady until the faster Beacon Moonlight catches them again. In the end, we make it through at a reasonable pace. For Duty 11, we went to Tam-Tara Deepcroft again, and while our tank is a Sprout Marauder, they definitely are not pulling like a new player, so this is probably not their first rodeo. Not that this was a problem. Me spending my time healing the tank is totally worth it if it means the tank can do more AoE damage, which they can. Our Thaumaturge was playing quite weirdly though. Based on what I was seeing, I think they did recognize that they should be casting fire spells, but simultaneously thought the increased MP costs meant they shouldn't cast fire spells in Astral Fire. I tried to briefly explain to them to use more fire spells in sequence near the end of the dungeon, which I'm not sure if they saw. Another interesting detail there is that the Thaumaturge also used Limit Break on the final boss, although at a moment where it was invulnerable, which is to say they seem to have some experience or awareness there, but a very weird mix of experience. Considering the various factors, one tank pulling big, the other pulling small, and the difference in DPS players and such, it might be funny to consider that this run was just about 15 seconds faster than the previous one. For DD12, we went to Bismarck Extreme. For the starting bit, things go well, but when we get to the Serpent intermission, we have some chaos with the tanks. As I've understood it, the debuff these Serpents give you make them do more damage to you, but does not actually prevent you from attacking or hurting either of them. This means that it is important that the green debuff tank takes the blue Serpent and the blue debuff tank takes the green Serpent. But for the rest of the party, they can really just burst down one of them and be done with it. Due to a bit of a confusing tank switch, the Serpents end up hanging out next to each other for a while. We do get it resolved eventually, but a moment later debuffs are redistributed. Thankfully, the tanks get the same debuffs as before, so it didn't matter. Next, our first weather is the Purple Lightning. This means spread AoEs, and also that preferably you leave the bubbles alive, as they will always bait one of the spreads on them instead. We almost managed to take out Bismarck in one go, but half the party does not manage to jump off in time and dies. However, I have survived a worse position than this. In fact, we wouldn't even need to raise anyone. We can win simply by surviving until the next opportunity to hurt Bismarck. That said, the next weather is the Yellow Wind, which means knockbacks, so get to the center. The knockbacks are also followed immediately by a donut AoE, so you just go back to the center again. And also in this phase, you really should kill the bubbles, since they will hit you to try and prevent you from using the Dragon Killers if you don't. Emphasis on try. We managed to get the Dragon Killers going and finish off Bismarck right then. And finally for duty 13, we went to Brayflox Longstop. Right at the start of the dungeon, I get distracted, reminding the tanks to use grit, and accidentally pull the next pack over. We still manage, of course. A funny little detail about the rain catch is that it can apply an AoE silence around it, which can be mildly problematic for Dark Knights among tanks, and of course healers in general if it gets stopped at an important moment. The simple solution is to bring echo drops, of course. Aside from this small hiccup, the rest of the dungeon went perfectly fine. What makes an extreme like Titan really scary when things start to go sideways is that the sort of layout of the fight makes it so that it can seem like everyone is doing everything right and you still lose, making it really hard to troubleshoot in between pulls. Ultimately, in this case, the problem was getting Titan properly out to the edge and for players to aim themselves properly to not just scoot off the arena. That aside, we had a nice mix of dungeons, with not everything being low-level leveling dungeons for once as a healer. And we have now also passed 13/21 of the way to the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before its rework, the final boss in Brayflox Longstop had a more open and asymmetric arena. However, its mechanics were also simpler, with the focus being on poison puddles being placed on random player locations. What made those puddles distinct is that if the dragon stood in them, it would slowly heal, which could pose a problem for some parties. Ultimately, it usually didn't matter and mainly made the fight feel clunky and awkward. On top of that, if you were doing the duty as a squadron, then the poison puddle would only target you.